Pardon the speaking.
Armadacon has 2 book launches.
Really?
Tracey Norman and this other bloke. And I've got the feeling these books are as different from each other as it's possible to do.
Quite like it. An evening of contrasts.
Evening contrast. We have not discussed very much how we're going to split this into halves. So we're just going to do
With an axe?
I was going to suggest whoever is the victor bashing the other person with their book, but Tracey's is a lot thicker than mine.
Book wars!
You want to introduce your book?
Yes, I'd love to. Alright, so my book, Who is Anna Steinberg, is a Victorian supernatural fantasy. In the first chapter, which I will read in a minute, we meet a young girl who finds herself, for various reasons, some of which will become clear in the first chapter, alone, away from home, vulnerable, and disguised as a boy, which in 1865 is not really de rigueur, unless you're a particular kind of lady. So this book follows Victor's, as she becomes, adventures as she is rescued by Anna Steinberg, and the 2 of them together bond, find friendship, and then some supernatural shit occurs. So, yeah, that's my book in a sort of very small nutshell.
Mine's not set in Victorian times.
Yes, 1865.
My main character does not find himself dressed as a boy. Phew. I wrote Dawn and Dave of the Dead. It was written, or started to be written during the pandemic. It's not about the pandemic, it's about zombies and the desire to have to go to work. And you must run fast to save lives. Being the vitally important part of it. So that's as different as you can get.
Pretty much, yeah.
Nobody disguises themselves
But
as a boy.
there are both, in both books there are people dressed as women and dressed as men.
That's true. That's very, very true.
We found
Yes.
a link.
My book does have men dressed as men and women dressed as women.
So does mine, in fairness.
Yes.
There are similarities.
This is going to get really
So you
complicated.
just copied each other then?
There are parallels.
Cupids.
I mean, you've got to pay attention because the essay question is going to be compare and contrast. So, who wants to go first for the reading?
Would you like to do yours first?
Yes, no. All right,
That's not what you told me earlier. You told me
I just want to get it over with. This is effectively the first chapter. There is a prologue, but this is the first chapter, so I don't need to introduce anything at all. The end of the world was over. Phew. We were saved. Phew. It had all been a bit touch and go, like the referee's decision going to VAR. To be fair, zombie hordes still overran everywhere. The infrastructure had collapsed, supplies were scarce, and workplaces deserted. However, the latest variant was a shambler. Things can be repaired. There were fewer people wanting supplies, and working from home had been a great success. It was a shame, but despite all the unlife, life went on in an endless month of Sundays. It actually was a Sunday. There was a thing. Dave sat in the garden, half hidden by the long grass, drinking Pimm's. It had everything. Strawberries, apple, slices of orange, cucumber, carrots, all floating amongst the bubbles. The Pimm's itself had been carelessly conjured from gin, apple juice, the last of the vodka, and a sticky bottle of something that began with J. The syrupy nature of that last liqueur had long ago dribbled gunk over the label. This Pimm's tasted much better than some of the earlier experiments. Kosher Pimm's itself had become somewhat rare, almost as precious as flour and pasta, so beggars couldn't be choosers. The Prime Minister had explained it in his singular style. It is not the end of the end. It is not even the middle of the end, but it is perhaps the beginning of the middle of the end, if not the middle of the end's beginning. And that made perfect sense. The acting emergency minister, Fenton Briggs MP, had recently assured everyone that they may even be as far along as the end's middle. The bright uplands of the new normal beckoned with the promise of growth, which was something to look forward to. Pensions were down, but inheritance was up. There'd be work, plenty of opportunities for people like Dave, who had, after all, come up with the important government slogan: keep up appearances and act like everything's fine. So, as ends of the world went, this one wasn't too bad. Not that David had much experience. This was his first apocalypse. It was everyone's first apocalypse, and for many it had been their last. Dave flapped his hand to discourage a buzzing thing. The end of the world is nigh, Dexter said. Dave's housemate sat on the other deck chair in pyjamas and a hoodie. Nigh, said Dave. It's here. At the start, or as the PA would have put it, the beginning of the beginning of the beginning, Dave had suspected something was wrong. He'd popped into the local supermarket for supplies, and as he'd gone up and down the aisles, bread, beer, bagels, the essential bees, he'd come to a sudden halt. In between fabric conditioners and soothing balm tissues, there was a gap, like a missing tooth. No loo roll. There was that expression, shit scared, but seriously. Anyone who had ever played a video game knew that you didn't panic buy quilted double ply. You stocked up on guns, ammunition, explosives, and, well, not in England, of course, but that was the principle. He'd stood in aisle 5 while the other trolley pilots, their wheeled cargo pods piled high, weaved around him. There, an entire section devoid of stock. But everything else was there, so it was, he shrugged, probably fine. And they'd said so on the telly. Back home, Dave had sat on the sofa with a bagel burning in the toaster and a beer in his hand, while a government spokesman had been very reassuring, very anti-alarmist, and very at the foot he had been on the other channel, so Dave had missed the actual specifics of what he hadn't needed to worry about. The next week, the supermarket had run out of pasta, bread, Pims, and anything frozen. Dave had been forced to buy fruit and vegetables. Though the fruit had come in handy for the non-existent Pims. And 2 days later, he'd been furloughed. Furloughed hadn't been a word in anyone's vocabulary, but it turned out to mean a yellow card and a sit-down on the subs bench. When the apocalypse proper arrived, people wandering around, shambling really, with only a vague awareness of their surroundings, their eyes bloodshot from staring at their smartphones. All too quickly that was replaced by screaming and desperate running, and then by zombies. Everybody hid indoors. Stay indoors, stay calm, stay sane. Save yourself, save the NHS, save power, save loo roll, save lives. Friday night down the pub was cancelled, as was the match on Saturday, and Sunday league football. With all the extra time, Dave had expected to play a lot more FIFA on his PlayStation. But, well, so, feet up in the garden, Dave and Dexter had made cocktails. Sitting on the patio drinking Pims, it's actually nice, Dexter said. He poured himself yet another Pims. This is growing on me. It's an acquired taste, Dave agreed. They sat for a while in their own thoughts, mellow in the sunshine. Listen, Dexter said. Shh, listen. So Dave listened. Yes, there. Slipped into the silence. Between the gunshots, sirens, screams, and the ever-present moaning of the undead, Dave could just make out the tweet, tweet, tweet of birdsong. Peaceful, that was it. Is it a lark, do you think? Dexter asked. Dave checked his phone and found he'd thumped up Matchbox, the dating app. Talk of wishful thinking. There were women on the screen, distraught from losing partners, but wanting to move on. It was fine to have an online relationship, but sooner or later, they always wanted to meet. And then it was all screaming and shouting and running. And that was just travelling to the restaurant. Going on a date should not be a life or death decision. Dave swiped left. This wasn't a world in which to go on dates. There was no future of, ooh, she looked nice. Dawn 372. Likes cats, blah, 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 blah. Dave jerked my what? He tried to see the attacking zombie. Maybe it's a nightingale, Dexter said. Nightingales come out at night. Dave glanced back at his phone to find that he'd swiped right. Maybe it was fate. Maybe not. Nothing would happen. Dave's mobile pinged. Perhaps this Dawn 372 was interested in him. They'd have a virtual one-night stand that led to some kinky sexting. But no, it was a text from work. It would be something about Monday's virtual briefing. Dave didn't mind Microsoft Teams, as it tended to crash and give him a series of breaks during the day. Hang on, it said, into work, as in, into work. In reality, in the office, it was the beginning of the end of the end. What is it, Dexter asked? Dave swallowed. I have to go into the office. So, I should hand over to Tracey to do your drinking scene.
Okay. I have also chosen chapter 1, so we should just launch straight in. Lying in the dark, my sleep-muddled brain struggled to work out where the noise was coming from. Footsteps pounded along the hall below, and I leaped out of bed, grabbing my robe. My heart beat faster as I heard raised voices and a flurry of activity. Throwing my robe on and clutching it around me, I went out onto the landing in time to hear my uncle shouting instructions. I ran down the stairs as the hall clock struck midnight. My blood froze in my veins as I saw my uncle in the hallway, his face ashen. When he spotted me, he dropped his doctor's bag and hurried to me. Catching my hands in both of his, he pulled me into a tight hug. To my amazement, when he drew back, I saw his eyes were glistening with tears. John, my father's valet, was lighting the lamps. That done, he hurried to the end of the hall and disappeared through the green baize door which led to the servants' quarters. From beyond, I could hear him shouting for Mrs. Armitage, the housekeeper. None of our servants ever shouted. My heart began to thump. The sound of running footsteps echoed along the servants' corridor. I stared at my uncle. He was breathing heavily, his expression strained. Uncle Geoffrey, what is it? My voice cracked. Deep down, I knew. It's your father, my dear. The words tumbled over themselves as they rushed towards me. I'm afraid he's escaped. We have to get you somewhere safe. I fear he will come back here and... He tailed off, his face greyer than before. His mania has not improved while he has been in our care. If anything, he has become more fixated on his strange beliefs than when he first came to us. A wave of lightheadedness swept over me, making me stagger. My uncle slipped his arm around my waist, half supporting, half carrying me into the parlour. He settled me into a chair, and then hurried to the window, checking the fastenings of the shutters and giving them an experimental rattle while I watched him wide-eyed. He glanced over at me and paused, and I could tell he was viewing me through professional eyes. He strode across to the decanter on the sideboard by the door, poured a strong measure, then came over and knelt in front of me, holding out the glass. Like an obedient sleepwalker, I took it and sipped, coughing as the sharp flavour hit my throat. He made me drink half the contents before he took the glass and put it by the chair leg. How? I whispered. How did he get out? I thought the asylum was secure. My uncle let out a frustrated sigh. It is, my dear, it is, he said. Your father is a clever and resourceful man, more so than any of us realised. I'm not certain how he managed it, but it seems likely that he joined a group of professors who were being shown around the facility this evening and followed them out at the end of the tour. I stared at him, my jaw dropping. What? I gasped. How on earth could he just walk out? My uncle held up his hand. I wish I had answers. The orderlies are being questioned. I suspect he convinced one of them to assist him. What shall I do? I asked, feeling numb. If he does come here and is determined to get into the house, how can we prevent him? Only John would stand a chance against my father if it got that far. Poor Parsons is far too old to be able to take on someone with military training. I had already sent one of the orderlies to the police station. Shifting to practicalities, Uncle Geoffrey's voice became more businesslike. I have asked for someone to be stationed here permanently until your father is found. As an extra precaution, however, I think it would be best if you moved to my lodgings at the asylum until then. What? I exclaimed. The asylum? He has just escaped from there, and I doubt he will be keen to return. It is the one place where I believe you will be completely safe. He got to his feet and helped me up. Now, let us go and pack a bag for you. My carriage is waiting outside. We need to make haste. I nodded like an automaton and followed him as he hurried for the stairs. Once in my room, we found my maid, Eliza, packing a case for me, tears streaming down her face. When we entered, she wheeled around with a sharp cry, only relaxing when she saw who it was. Fresh tears began to fall as she stared at me in fear and bewilderment. I ran over and hugged her before turning my attention to the items I would need to pack. My uncle let out a soft "ha" at one point and left the room, returning a couple of minutes later with one of my father's suits. He held it out to me. Just as a precaution, he said, may I suggest you wear this? I know what you're thinking, but please consider he won't be looking for a young man. The fact that Eliza did not throw her hands up in horror at this unorthodox suggestion drove home the seriousness of my predicament. My stomach lurched and a wave of nausea washed over me. Eliza finished packing the case and we went behind my screen so I could put the suit on. The starched shirt collar was uncomfortable and the jacket far too big. I shared my father's height, not his build. But the trousers were a revelation. And I was amazed at the freedom of movement I suddenly had when I was not encumbered by skirts, petticoats and corset. Eliza drew my hair back into a ponytail at the nape of my neck, tucking it inside the jacket so it was out of sight. My uncle handed me one of my father's hats, and when I put it on, I was taken aback at how like him I looked. In the dark, with my collar turned up, I was certain I would pass as a boy. Eliza took my bag and hurried downstairs with it as I crossed to my jewellery box and took out 3 or 4 items, most of which had belonged to my mother. I stuffed them in my pocket and followed my uncle out of the room. As he collected his bag and gave John and Parsons some final instructions, a thought struck me, and I went into my father's study. He kept money in one of the desk drawers. There was a tiny nagging voice at the back of my mind, suggesting it might be advisable to take some. There was nothing useful in the first drawer. In the second, I found a letter opener which I slid into my sleeve. The third drawer was full of notebooks. I took a few out and dumped them on the floor so I could see what else was in there, finding a roll of banknotes tucked away in a back corner. I pocketed it and started putting the notebooks away, but my hands were trembling so badly that I dropped one. It bounced, flipped, and landed on its back, pages falling open. Muttering a quiet curse, I knelt down to pick it up, then stopped, staring. There were drawings, notes, maps, strange symbols, words I had never seen before. Reaching out slowly, I picked it up and leafed through. Page after page was covered in untidy writing that I didn't immediately realise was my father's because it was so different from his usual neat script. This was obviously something to do with his illness. On impulse, I stuffed some of the books into another pocket, marvelling at the ease with which men could carry items. Dashing back into the hall, I met John and Eliza coming to find me. John helped me into one of my father's heavy and cumbersome overcoats. He stood back, looking me up and down, then gave a small, satisfied nod and bowed. "You look very good, miss," he said in a reassuring voice. I tried to smile, my eyes filling with tears. "Uncle Geoffrey," who had opened the front door slightly and was peering into the dark street outside, glanced back and blinked at me for a moment as if he had seen a ghost. "Are you ready?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "Yes, I think so." My uncle signalled to John, who began to extinguish the lamps in the hall. When he was satisfied that we were not going to be illuminating the entire street, he opened the front door and headed along the path to the carriage. I paused to give Eliza a hug, then went to the door. As I did, I saw the driver topple from his seat at the front of the carriage. My uncle yelled a terrible animal sound which was cut off by a dull thud. John sprang over to the door, pushing me behind him. Outside we could hear the unmistakable sound of men fighting, and John ran down the path towards the carriage, disappearing behind it. Eliza and I stared at each other in horror as Parsons appeared at the end of the hall. "This way, miss, quickly," he called. "Eliza, close the door." "What about John?" Eliza quavered. "John knows he will need to go to the back. Do as I say, girl," the butler snapped, and Eliza slammed the door. I heard her bolting it and turning the key in the lock as Parsons led me into the servants' quarters. The baize door swung closed behind us and Parsons ushered me towards the kitchen. "The police will be here soon, miss," he said. "Find somewhere nearby where you can hide safely. Perhaps the church near the park. That's not too far away. As soon as the master has been taken back into custody, this will all be over." He gave me a quick, avuncular smile, opening the door into the kitchen yard and looking around. The sounds of fighting could still be heard. I had a chance to get away, but I feared for John and my uncle and for the poor driver. "It's all clear, miss," said Parsons. "Get yourself somewhere safe, quickly." There was a sudden crash from the front of the house, and we both froze. The horse squealed, and I could hear the clatter of hooves. Parsons caught his breath and ushered me out into the kitchen yard. "Please, miss, hurry," he begged. "If anything should happen to you." He tailed off, and I stared at him, unable to form any coherent thought. There was another crash, this time from the front door, and I heard Eliza scream. Parsons groaned. "Oh, miss, please, you have to get to safety, please." I nodded, and he ushered me to a gate. I realised it led to an area behind our summer house and felt a sudden shame that I had never seen this part of my garden before. "There is another gate to your right, miss, just over there," Parsons whispered, pointing. "It's unlocked, so John can get back in. It opens onto the street. Head away from the house and then take the next road on the right. You can get back onto the main road from there and make for the church." "Thank you, Parsons," I managed to choke out, fear gripping my throat and wrenching my stomach so much I feared I would be sick. Gripping my bag, I ran to the gate, opened it and peered out. The street beyond was dark and empty, a few tendrils of fog swirling about. I stared in terror along the side of my house towards the corner, expecting my father to appear at any second. The horse was quiet now, but there were still a few scuffles and yells. Someone ran across the road at the corner, hefting a cudgel. It was Soames, valet to our neighbours the Fortescues. He was a tall, heavily built man who, like my father, had been in the army and knew how to handle himself. It was now or never. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the street, pulling the gate closed behind me. Biting my lip, I glanced back over my shoulder at the house, then turned and ran into the dark.
Shall I respond to the reading? Do you have some questions for a couple of minutes?
Do some questions?
Or shall I do a reading?
What would you like?
I'll do a reading.
Do.
The next chapter is the second chapter, but it's not the Dave character, it's the Dawn character. So I've got Dawn to read it. Not that the names are in any way...
not based on us, not based on us, Dawn. No. Okay. Dawn and Dave of the Dead by David Wade. Dawn checked her reflection in the mirror and adjusted her glasses. Not bad, she thought, given she was the last woman on Earth. She looked her 20-something, haggard around the eyes, and yet about to get on in the world. Sadly, there was no world left to get onto. Her phone pinged. He ferreted it out of her bag amongst a packet of tissues, compact lipstick, Mars bottle of hand sanitizer. She checked the notification, but it was only some stupid alert on Matchbox. She checked, for a giggle, no doubt. Some bloke on the dating app had swiped right. It was probably some zombie acting on a buried impulse. Apparently they could do that. So it was pretty much like a pocket dial. Some loser, no, she shouldn't think ill of the undead, called Dave Knight, who was into...
Dawn!
Mr. Anderson banged on the door. Dawn had effectively reached for the alarm cord. She wondered if she could pretend not to be in. Instead, she said, Mr. Anderson, I'm in the ladies.
I need the figures for the meeting.
Yes, she'd swiped right. When everything had gone tits up and pear-shaped, as Councillor Grant had put it, the men on the emergency list had all rushed to Anchor, the nuclear bomb-proof telephone exchange. In the confusion, some had rushed to the Anchor, across in Digbeth, as their last stand in the snug had been relayed in a series of desperate phone messages and texts. They blamed Barry Logistics for missing the attachment with the map. The women on the emergency list had paused to help others, and, well, that had been that. Dawn had only survived because Councillor Grant had needed someone to carry his emergency case. She'd asked him, "What's this all about?"
Hurry!
He said.
I'll explain later.
He had not explained on their rush across the telephone house, and he'd been tight-lipped on that peculiar lift that only went down. Once they were underground in the maze of tunnels, he'd finally explained the situation.
We're safe.
From what?
Here, in these tunnels, we're safe.
Ah, I see. She was not, however, safe. There was Mr. Anderson for a start. The complex of tunnels had been constructed in the 1950s for the Cold War, and secretly added to whenever someone, somewhere, had threatened a Conservative government.
Dawn!
Mr. Anderson was back. Yes, Mr. Anderson, what is it you want?
You know what I want. I was wondering if you'd done the figures for the meeting.
They're on your desk.
Yes, but I wondered if you'd go through them with me.
I'm powdering my nose.
Look, Dawn,
Mr. Anderson whined.
stop fighting it. You know you're going to give in eventually. Might as well enjoy yourself. Have fun while you're still young.
Will you... No, she didn't want another disciplinary case, so she bit her tongue. After all, how could he be sent on gardening leave pending an investigation? Ask Councillor Grant.
Oh, you tease.
She heard him walk away, and she let go of the alarm cord. If she actually pulled it every time she panicked, it would have broken long ago. The ladies was her refuge. The room had been built to accommodate 50 telephone operators, so it was spacious for the one occupant. It wasn't that the analogue switchboards had given way to digital boxes, it was because she was the only female survivor. So gradually, she had moved in a comfy chair, coffee table, lamp, bottle of gin, glossy magazines, and all the comforts that an executive washroom built in the 1950s could afford. Whatever else, she could retreat to the ladies and her safe, women-only, solitary sanctuary within the last refuge. Except that Dawn was not technically the last woman on Earth. There were many others, and you'd need the fingers on both hands, and then some, to count them all. There was Mrs. Rogers in Manchester's nuclear bunker, Annette and Jasmine in London, Lieutenant Smythe Anders on HMS Vigilant, submerged, and the girl who kept crying over the emergency channel. Everything was emergency down here. Dawn's initial panic had subsided into dull, repetitive anxiety. But, as the slogan put it, keep up appearances and act like everything's fine. The trick was to maintain standards, manners, like using the right knife and fork, kept the descent into barbarism at bay. If you allowed people to spread butter on their bread with a fish knife, well, who knew where it would end? Not that they had any bread or butter. But she at least would start on the outside and work inwards with a napkin on her lap and white wine with fish. She had enough spoons for that, though perhaps not enough cutlery for anything else. Not that they had any white wine or fish. So she would follow the good practice and keep everything going. With that in mind, Dawn popped her compact back into her bag, tied her hair back in a business-like ponytail, and stepped out into the concrete underground tunnels. She was the last woman on Earth, West Midlands emergency area. And that counted for something, surely.
Mr. Way,
I've been heckled, yeah, sorry.
It's got the Dave Off and James seal of approval.
It's on the seal.
I should have to put a little sort of logo on the front cover.
Take you with you whenever you're doing any reading.
Susan would like that, yeah.
You can hire him out if you want to do so.
I have thought about it.
I'll encourage hecklers while you find out.
Right, okay. I've marked the place, but I kind of found a paragraph and thought, oh yeah, that looks about right. And that's as far as I got. Right, so my next bit is going to be from chapter 7. So, so Victor has ended up in what she hopes might be friendly company. She's certainly been taught a little bit about self-defence, and she has encountered this strange girl, this street girl called Anna Steinberg, who has rescued her from unspeakable horrors, which, in order to discover the nature of, you will need to buy the book. So, we're going to read a little bit from chapter 7. Where shall I start? Right. So basically, Anna and Victor have found somewhere to hole up out in safety. So they're not on the street at the moment. And Anna had disappeared off to do something mysterious, leaving Victor behind. You've been gone for a while, I said, keeping my voice light. Where did you go? Something flickered over her face. Annoyance, perhaps. Then it vanished, and she smiled and joined us at the table, reaching for some sewing and accepting the cup of tea Arthur pushed across to her. Her hands looked cold, the knuckles dry and red. She caught me looking and flushed a little, setting the cup down and moving the sewing to her lap so her hands were hidden. I fixed my gaze onto my own work and said nothing. The silence continued for a while, then Arthur, glancing at the clock, announced that he had some tasks to carry out elsewhere in the school, and we should keep the door locked while he was gone. He put on his black coat, smoothing down the lapels and ensuring his shirt cuffs were even, then folded the mended clothes neatly, took a box of shoe polish and brushes from the dresser, and went out. As the door closed quietly behind him, Anna reached for the black thread, cut a length, and rethreaded her needle, then looked over at me. Had any more thoughts about what you should do? She asked. She looked watchful. I think you were right, I said. It might be best if I leave Dover for a few days. She nodded thoughtfully and turned her attention to her sewing. A minute or two passed, and then she said, It just so happens that when I was out, I happened across a pair of tickets to Calais. Interested? We could go on to Paris, perhaps. I gaped at her. How on earth? I began. Are you interested or not? She demanded. How I got them isn't important. You'll have to understand that if we're to travel together, I know this is all new to you, but if you ever want to stand a chance of fitting in, you're going to have to learn to be a lot more accepting. Otherwise, you'll stand out like a sore thumb. I stared at her, the embarrassed blush warming my face. Anna's gaze softened a little. "I'm sorry," she said in a more reasonable tone. "I didn't mean to snap. I seem to have become a little sensitive over the years. Forgive me?" She smiled and held out her hand. After a moment, I reached out and took it. Her fingers squeezed mine and her smile grew broader. "Paris will be fun," she said. "I haven't been there for a while." "Paris is beautiful," I said quietly when she lapsed into silence, lost in her memories. "I would enjoy seeing it with you." Anna flashed me a quick smile, got up and went to the dresser. She opened the cupboard and looked inside. "Hungry?" "No, thank you," I said. Anna found an apple and took a bite, closing her eyes as she savoured the taste. It occurred to me that it was probably some time since she'd last had easy access to food. I said nothing. Every time I opened my mouth, I either revealed my naivety or asked some gauche and insensitive question. Anna's way of interacting with the world was completely alien to me. Still, all I had to do was get through the next few days without being robbed, attacked, or discovered by my father. If I kept my head down and maintained my male disguise and tried not to annoy Anna too much, I might be all right. Anna snapped her fingers right in front of my nose and I gasped, startled out of my reverie. She was smiling at me. "I don't know what on earth you were just thinking about," she said, "but stop it. It was making you frown far too much." I managed a little chuckle as my heart rate slowed back to normal. "I was thinking that I would need to be sure not to annoy you too much over the next few days till I can go home again," I said. She stared at me for a moment, then threw her head back and laughed merrily. Her laugh was infectious, and very soon the two of us were giggling away like schoolgirls. All at once, she shushed me, covering her mouth with her hand and glancing guiltily towards the door. "We'd best be quiet, otherwise we might get Arthur into terrible trouble," she said. "He's been very good to me. I'd hate to repay that by losing him his position here." I nodded, trying to quell my laughter, but failed miserably, and ended up making the most awful snorting sound. Would have given poor Mrs. Armitage a fit. The snort set Anna off again, and for the next few minutes we struggled valiantly to control ourselves with varying degrees of success. Anna had to put down her sewing at one point and wipe her eyes, which set me off again. "I like you, Victor," she said, stressing the name. "Don't worry, I don't want to know your real name. I understand why you don't want to tell me. To be honest, I would do the same if I was in your position." She picked up the sewing, finished off the buttonhole she was mending, and folded the garment neatly over the back of one of the armchairs. "I'm rather looking forward to travelling with you. I'm guessing you will travel in those clothes, yes?" She pointed to the shirt and trousers, and I nodded. "I have no choice. It would make sense to pose as brother and sister," she said, taking the tickets from what looked like a hidden pocket attached to the inside of her waistband. "The boat leaves from the docks at 11 tomorrow morning. Tide permitting. You'd better make the most of the luxury we have here." I was about to remark that Arthur's small Spartan room was hardly luxury, but caught myself just in time and said instead, "Once we reach Calais, what will we do?" Anna shrugged. "What I always do," she said. "See what happens. Improvise." Something in my expression gave her pause and she smiled. "Don't look so worried," she said. "I know it's not what you're used to, but think about it for a moment. You'll be able to go anywhere you like, whenever you want to. There won't be anyone telling you what to do or making sure you're being modest and behaving like a proper young lady. You might actually enjoy yourself." I considered. She was right. It might be the only opportunity I would ever have to experience that sort of freedom. As soon as I was back at home, everything would go back to normal, including my shopping trips with Mrs. Armitage and being driven somewhere in the carriage so that I could go for a walk. Now I thought about it, my life seemed rather ridiculous. Perhaps if I tried to view this entire dreadful situation as an opportunity, it would help me to deal with it a little better. Something occurred to me in the midst of my musings. What about travel papers? Mine are at home. Oh, don't worry about that, Anna said. It'll be taken care of. I know someone. Her eyes flashed at me, daring me to retort. I gave a little sigh. In the circumstances, forged papers were the least of my worries. I searched around for a way to redirect the conversation. Do you have any favourite places in Paris? I asked. One of mine is Notre Dame. We started discussing our experiences of Paris and the various places we would like to see if we made it that far. After the first few minutes, the conversation started to flow, and before long it felt like I was chatting with my best friend, Elizabeth. Anna was fun, knowledgeable, and it seemed completely unflappable, taking everything in her stride, including me. Arthur came back towards dinner time with more mending and another basket, this time containing a large pot full of roast chicken, potatoes and vegetables, along with bread, cheese and more fruit. He'd also somehow managed to get hold of a bottle of wine, so we hastily cleared the table and set out plates and cutlery. The three of us ate heartily, toasting each other. It was with a comfortably full belly and a much lighter heart that I bade Anna and Arthur good night before heading into Arthur's room to prepare myself for bed. I was exhausted. I was not used to so much walking in one day, and my muscles were complaining, especially after my training session with Arthur. But I did not want to look weak in front of either of them, so refrained from commenting. I gutted the candle as I slipped beneath the blankets, but sleep refused to come. I lay there listening to the murmur of Anna and Arthur's voices as they talked quietly. Curious, and hoping to learn more about Anna, I pushed back the blankets and tiptoed over to the door, pressing my ear against it. Where this time? Arthur said. I'm guessing Paris, seeing you were both talking about it earlier. Yes, Anna replied shortly. It could be a good cover for your activities, he remarked. Maybe, she said thoughtfully. We shall see. Frowning, I pressed my ear more firmly against the door, my heart pounding, and a terrible feeling of nausea rising in my gut. So, I was to be used as cover for some street thief's illegal activities. I'd clearly been mistaken about Anna. I had thought we were beginning to find an understanding, but I'd misread the signs. She was using me. Well, I thought, as I got back into the bed. Two could play at that game.
I don't have another reading prepared. There's questions and answers.
Why did you decide on a Victorian setting, and did you decide on a setting, or did you just think about it being now?
Yes, that's how very well. Part of the story actually focuses on the what if related to a real life crime which took place at the end of the 1840s in Paris. So, in order for the characters involved to be the ages that I wanted them to be, I had to set it very precisely in 1865. So it's taking this real life crime and there are two endings to this story. So these crimes happened. I can't really tell you too much about them because it would be a huge spoiler. But this crime happened between 1847 and 1849 in various places around Paris. And there are two endings to this story. One says that the person was imprisoned and died after the end of the year. The other has him a number of years later, around about 1878, a model citizen, having enjoyed jobs as a clerk and a lighthouse keeper, and so when you learn what the crime was, you'll find the whole sort of he was living quietly as a clerk, slightly unlikely, frankly, but because there is this vagueness about what this guy's actual fate was, I thought, well, what if the one where he's still alive in 1878 is actually true? What can I do with that? And that's how the story progressed.
So what was the question again exactly?
Why did you decide? Because your story to me is not set at a particular time. did you decide on a particular date to set your story? Or did you just say, it's now?
It was just now, I think, yes. I mean, the question's really where do you get your ideas from, isn't it?
No,
It's
but
sort of.
it's kind of about when you decide when you've got a story, and you said your story's set so that you can have the characters behaving around an incident that really happened. And a lot of writers, when they're writing, they then have to decide if they're setting it in the real world. They have to decide when the date is, because there are incidents that would affect their storyline. So did you decide to set your story so that things in the real world could affect it or not, is more the question.
It's an interesting question. That never crossed my mind when I was writing it. It was
That's
just
the answer.
set now, and I made up the real world things that were happening, so I didn't have to connect it with anything that was happening today.
It almost sounded like a reimagining of the circumstances of 2020.
Well, it was. I mean, I was literally sitting on the patio drinking pins when I had the idea. And the idea is very simple. If you have a zombie apocalypse, I don't think it will be like The Walking Dead. I think there will be a period of time where everybody was trying to act normally and everything was okay. And you would work from home. You would get furloughed. Maybe it would eventually become The Walking Dead or whatever. But for quite a long time, it will be. I think we all adapted, didn't we, to the pandemic in very strange and different ways. And I think if you had a zombie apocalypse, we'd all adapt in strange and weird ways.
There is like a great Britishness and keep the upper lip, and that's what I like about that.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we will carry on whatever we will do.
The Americans will be, going to their gun hoards and taking out their Uzi 9mm and plasma rifles in the 40-watt range or whatever, and we would put the kettle on.
Tea souls.
Yeah.
Oh, that was different.
Weirdly enough, listening to both of you read these brilliant books, all I could think of was Pride and Prejudice Zombies, and that's it. I cannot get past it anymore.
We're going to co-write the sequel to both of these books. That would fly.
Talk about the surprise ending.
Gary.
How did you discover that a nailed, spiked baseball bat was a completely useless object to use?
It's very essential when you're writing to do practical research.
Did you do a health and safety? Sorry, I don't mean.
So what was your most fun part of the research then, that you did for yours?
Oh, I see, the baseball bat, obviously. Practicing with various gardening implements to see which was the most effective against zombies. Drinking pills was very important. I must admit that the number of people buried in Birmingham Cathedral graveyard is something I looked up on Google.
There you go, that's really good.
Really research very much at all. But it is set around where I live, so...
Yeah, to be fair, I was reading it and tracking it on Google Maps, because I also know the area reasonably well.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you work out where they live? Because
Yeah,
I never worked that bit out.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, that leads very neatly into how the sort of staggering amount of research I did on Google Maps, because I don't know Dover at all, but now I do. So I had to track a route using Google Street Maps, Street View, from this house that I'd chosen. I sort of scrolled around, had a nose at people's houses, thought that looks like a suitable house for a fairly wealthy family to be living in, and oh, it's on the corner of the street, so that would work with that, and oh, there's a road up there, so if she goes along there and comes back down here, she'll end up on the main road, and the church is over there, so that's great. So I was essentially following this route on Google Maps, which was fine, but then I also had to do the same, because when they reached Calais, I had to get them to Amiens, which is like 4 days away. So I spent a very long time on Google Maps tracking a route between Calais and Amiens, working out the speed of a horse, because they're in a horse and carriage, so it would have to be, you know, how many miles could they cover in a day, and then looking for little places which were roughly that far away, and looking at those and seeing which looked nice. Well, that was got a market square, great, Victor can buy a hat there, you know, things like that. So yeah, there was, and so in my book Bible, which is all of my research and bits and pieces that I did for this, I've actually
You are very organised.
I'm learning so much.
I've got the houses that people live in. So I'm that much of a librarian. So.
Tracey, that research comes through in that there's Victorian age and the thingy. I mean that's likely how you, especially that first chapter, it drew you into that age, which was impressive. In my book, it's impressive.
One of my reviews that I've had so far, was this one? Oh, there is something rather old-fashioned about the author's writing style. We could easily have been reading one of the original Dracula stories. This style of writing really suited the subject matter. Wow. That's why I did it.
It's almost like you did it on purpose. So.
I use Google Street View as well.
It's brilliant.
Fantastic.
It's a brilliant
Want to describe what this park looks like? Click, click. Oh, there it is.
Yep.
You know, oh,
Yep.
look, there's a nice, interesting little hut down there. We'll put that in.
Yeah.
And then when I finished the book, I went to this talk by ALCS, which is the Authors Lending and
Copyright
Society, to talk about ALI and things. And so I did the same journey my main character Dave takes to get to the train station, to take the train into Birmingham. Went to this meeting. And then they all suggested that we go to the Wellington, which is where I'd set one of the scenes in the book. So by chance, I was acting it out afterwards.
Returning to the scene of the crime.
Returning to the scene of the crime, yeah.
Without zombies.
Oh, that's after
Disguised. Dave, you said you looked into which gardening you found was best against zombies. So which one did you come up with?
An edging tool.
Yeah.
Edging tool is absolutely fantastic. You've got the reach for it. You've got the sort of slicing action, which is absolutely perfect for decapitating zombies. It's also very like the Vulcan Lurper. So it's a very SF weapon.
Yes.
Tracey, your reading process had essences of first person when you were reading. Is that kind of predominant, or is that just coincidental in the two passages you read?
The book is told by Victor. It's called Who is Anna Steinberg, but this is Victor's story just as much. And Victor is the one telling the story. So yes, we see things through Victor's eyes.
That's quite restrictive.
Maybe.
Well, challenging.
Writing influences. When I write things, you know, I'm influenced by the likes of Monty Python and Kenny Everett. The bit that Dave wrote, read out, I did detect a bit of Douglas Adams in there, even though he sort of parodied a speech from Winston Churchill. So is there any author that you sort of like to read and you sort of go, I like that?
If you're going to say my writing's like Douglas Adams, I'll just accept that. Thank you very much. Well, you're influenced by everybody you've read, I guess.
It's more of a writing style.
I mean, I would like to say Douglas Adams and Philip K. Dick.
Yeah.
Well, whether that's true or not.
What
What questions in the essay?
A fair chunk of Douglas Adams and what you read out.
I don't think you take enough drugs for Stephen K. Dick.
I'm working on it. Yes, Gary.
Oh, you've got 5 minutes left.
Yeah,
5 minutes.
Oh no! Oh, you're doing the hand symbol from the book.
Oh.
Right, I wondered what that meant. But it's the hand symbol from the book.
I'm doing the keeping it on time for you.
Well, the person in charge of programming is sitting here, so.
I can still fire you again.
Yeah, you might be that way.
Are there any other questions? We're obviously both here for the rest of the convention. And if you want to know what happens, whether Dave and Dawn meet and survive, or whether Anna Steinberg is revealed to be whatever, because I don't know, please ask us and buy a copy of the book. Yes, that's it.
Who's going to do the audiobooks?
You're going to do your
Are you ready for it? Well,
Yes, I've thought about that already. So, yeah.
Tracey has done one of my books as an audiobook. Fantastic. Really, really good.
It's so much fun to do.
And you can read Dave's in 2 days. It's really easy.
I spent months on this.
with a
Months. The amount of pins I had to drink.
This is clearly where I did not drink a single Pimm's while I was writing mine. So this is clearly where I'm going wrong.
Oh,
Gary, we now challenge you to read Tracey's in 2 days.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a bigger book. Might take you 3.
what sort of
Challenge
drinks
accepted.
go with your book then? If Pins goes with Dave?
I think with mine it would have to be a very nice fruity red. Read the book to find out why.
Apple wine. I think drinks with mine would be anything random from the back of your bar.
And once again, this is real life, isn't it, Dave? I remember your...
During the pandemic, I decided to drink all of the bottles of booze down the back of the bar. No one ever touches. And there were some really disgusting things. Like, you have to suffer for your art. You know?
I suffered by not drinking Pimm's.
Yes. Yes. So when I say, you know, something with a gunk going over the label, I've definitely had one of those.
Do you think American writers are so different from British ones because they don't drink enough?
Oh, yes. Don't have enough tea.
Yes, they drink a lot, but they don't drink tea.
The beers.
Any last questions?
Any last questions?
How do you deal with plot discrepancies?
Plot discrepancies?
I read my book out loud. Because that it helps me to make sure the conversation sounds like conversation. It helps me pick up repetition. It also helps me because I have one of those weird brains. If somebody has like blue eyes on that page, they must also have blue eyes on that page, and that is why I have these. These are my character cards with all their descriptions in, so I will never be caught out. And yeah, but I read my book out loud, and then as I'm reading it, if something jars, it's like, right, why is that jarring? So I'll go back and find the problem and fix it.
I'm lucky, I write in the comedic style, so I use plot discrepancies as a plot point.
Yeah, I can't do that with this one, sadly.
Get a bunch of Doctor Who fans together. Explain it to them. Because we are so used to trying to fix the continuity of Doctor Who. Well, we've run out of time, and we weren't going to try and sell some books.
So is tomorrow?
Thank you all very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.